Hi, my friends. Welcome back to Staying Strong for Marriage, is a YouTube channel dedicated to helping people go through marriage separation or divorce using Christian principles. My goal is to try to help you guys to survive that process. I know that it's very common in the States, in the West, also in the Middle East, other places I've been. It's rough. I know that cohabitation is going up, marriages have been going down. As far as people, they see that there's less and less value in getting involved in these. There's a growing movement online about guys just saying that, man, it's really not a good situation financially to get involved in the situation. I know that the public data, as far as in the U.S., puts divorces at about 50%, so the likelihood of success is 50%. Other people have really said, yeah, but if you realize that they're measuring people from age 16 to 110, then that number is actually lower. If you're talking about normal people that you're going to be married between, like, say, 18 and, say, 60, I mean, how many people are getting divorced at age 90, at age 110, you're probably kind of set in your ways. Or same for 16, 17, 18-year-olds for the most part. So, look, I don't want to see things go off the rails in the same way they are, and I'm trying to just do some content to help people out there. One of the things I've really looked at, as many of you have, is, well, what's going on? Like, why? What's the forces? What are the, is it, do we just not trust each other anymore? Is it, people can't pair bond after numerous sexual relationships? What's going on? Well, one thing I want to look at today was this issue of the Duluth model. I honestly didn't come up with this on my own. There is a content creator. His name is Bob Lewis, and so I want to give him credit because he works in paralegal, he works in family law, he's been married twice, he's gone through custody battles in both of his marriages. He's very good, but he's also on a warpath. I mean, he is pissed. So one thing that I decided to do is basically do a rework of the information he did. So I want to give him credit. I just can't put a card to his channel because, I'm putting my face on the screen. I'm trying to, use this as a way to finance and help support some humanitarian work that I want to do in the future. So, I just can't, go down that route. That's just that's a bit about where I'm coming from. So let's check this out. Excuse me. Weather is changing here. So doing this book, you can see here, I picked up a copy, Coordinating Community Responses to Domestic Violence, Lessons from Duluth and Beyond. This is Duluth, Minnesota, authored by Melanie Shepard, Pence. And if you haven't checked out some of my other videos, this is really I think I'm going to do a 4-part series on domestic violence and just false allegations. There's a lot of stuff going on. And one of the questions I've been posing is, what if families are really breaking up, or what if we're being kind of duped and convinced to break up our families and destroy our homes for someone else's agenda? And whether that's university agendas, ideologies. So the big question I'm really trying to ask by looking at this is, are these people looking out for the best interest of your marriage? Now, if you're in an abusive relationship, I've tried to talk about this in another video that's called Dear God, Should I Divorce My Abusive Spouse? I think that's worth looking at. It looks at a lot of different things from the scriptures, some of the things that Jesus said, as well as what are you supposed to do? You can't change people, but what are you supposed to do? It's a very rough situation. How can you, obey God, be a loving and forgiving person, and try to understand what's going on? So this is going to be if you go to counseling services, and we're also going to see why many people are covering up things that have happened in their relationships. I covered 5 or 6 different couples in those other videos where there was all kinds of violence that was happening, and yet no one had ever admitted to me that there was any abuse in their relationship. Wow. So here we go. Quotes. This is all going to be quotes from chapter 2, which is entitled Some Thoughts on Philosophy. So the DAIP, Domestic Abuse Intervention Program staff, agreed that it was about the nature of the relationship, but wanted to shift the focus of intervention from fixing or ending the relationship to confronting what seemed to be a sense of entitlement to use coercion, intimidation, or violence in this relationship that is not permissible in other social relationships. By making this shift, it was assumed that the whole center of attention would shift from resolving conflict to challenging the use of violence. So you could see these are all quotes from Pence in this chapter. And you can see, basically she's just saying that the primary idea wasn't to really keep people married. And so, and you might say, well, whatever your opinion is on that, it's just to be clear what their agenda was and where their priorities were. Let's look at this next set of slides. Okay, so still in chapter 2, although the DAPA staff DAIP staff argued against using causal explanations that require practitioners to assume a fairly universal psychological makeup among batterers, i.e. stress or anger control problems. We have developed some of our own truisms that also reduce complex social issues or social relationships, to slogans. So one of the things that Bob Lewis really said against this book and this work is like quote unquote social scientists or social engineers was like these people, they didn't stick to their guns. They weren't ethical in the way that they did their research and their science. They reduced complex things down into truisms and slogans. Is that in the best interest of your relationship, your kids, your marriage, your church, your community? Somewhere early in our organizing efforts, however, we changed the message to "he is violent in order to get control or power," end quote. The difference is not semantic, it is ideological. So you can see that they had an ideology that they were pushing. They weren't just doing pure science. They go on, we created a conceptual framework that in fact did not fit the lived experience of many of the men and women we were working with. Like those we were criticizing, we reduced our analysis to a psychological universal truism, page 29. Again, you can see where this is going. The DAIP staff remained undaunted by the difference in our theory and the actual experiences of those we were working with. We all engaged in ideological practices and claimed them to be neutral observations. Now, I haven't done the background on these people. I don't know. There's a bit that they talk about who they were as professionals, and none of them had like graduate degrees or PhDs. They were like volunteers and things like this, office managers. But it's like, on a personal level, I'm speaking. I don't know what their story is on a personal level. Why do this? Why? What happened? Clearly, they felt like there was like an injustice or an imbalance, and that it was like widespread across society, churches, law enforcement, legal institutions, educational institutions. But I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like this is the normal thing that people go out and do with their time. Why the agenda? Why the insistence on sticking to what they wanted to advance their agenda, even when some of the science and some of the reports disputed those facts? So eventually we realized that we were finding what we had already predetermined to find. The DAIP staff were interpreting what men seemed to expect or feel entitled to as desire. When we had to start explaining women's violence towards their partners, lesbian violence, and violence of men who did not like what they were doing, we were brought back to our original undeveloped thinking that the violence is rooted in how social relationships, for example, marriage, and the rights people feel entitled to within them are socially, not privately constructed. So they really go on to say that they were going to really try to attack or change society on multiple levels, and they had some difficulty on that, but where they really tried to focus their efforts on was in law enforcement. They set an aggressive agenda in order to press for people pressing charges. For more than a decade, the DAIP and shelter advocates reacted to this constant undercurrent of women are liars by arguing that women are saints. I think that makes it hard for women to realize if they are, abusive in any ways. It's going to be hard for them to get help. In many ways, we turn a blind eye to some women's use of violence, their drug use and alcoholism, and often harsh and violent treatment of their children. There did not seem to be a way to acknowledge these problems and still argue that this was a deeply gendered issue. So they wanted to say that it was men's problems, is a male issue, that women didn't get involved in this kind of thing. And I think the last video that I'll do on this issue is looking at the Dunedin longitudinal study. It was apparently very controversial, and Bettina Ardent said she covered it in a video I saw. It's called the Monstrous Lies of Domestic Violence. You can find her on YouTube. She also has a blog. But basically, it was this longitudinal study that looked at, were men any more abusive than women? And what they found was no, it was similar. It was like the same thing for men and women. And a lot of people didn't like that outcome. They had a tough time publishing it, and I'll catch up on that once I read the study. I'm probably going to do that this afternoon. I got another video coming out today. I'm going to do just covering the issues of what are allowable reasons to get divorced or marriage annulled in the Catholic Church, so you can keep your eye out for that. So moving on, we pursued a criminalization path to change the climate of tolerance. This approach left us with a question of what to do when victims fail to cooperate with our criminalization agenda. Our solution was to pursue cases even when a victim did not want it. And so you could see, this is maybe why people don't talk about this. This is why people don't, bring it up in the church, don't bring it up in counseling, because, people are terrified. They have no idea what's going to happen. If they want to get help for their marriage, if they want to make their marriage work, yet all they can do is either bite their lip, or, if they get anyone else involved, say counselors or the local shelter or law enforcement, then all of a sudden, you're forced to put your spouse in prison. And many people, they don't want to do that. They don't see that that's good for their kids, for the long-term health of people's careers that they've often spent a lot of time building and, doing all that education to get. So what are you going to do? Where can you go that's safe, where you can talk about these things? The DAIP staff project organizers spent 8 months learning all aspects of the system from practitioners in each of the participating agencies. The project organizers consisted of 3 women, Shirley Oberg. Her reputation and ability to talk about being abused without being dismissed opened all the key doors for us. Coral McDonald had been a volunteer at the shelter. She had considerable office management experience and made us look far more professional than we actually were at the time. And then goes on, Ellen Pence speaking, was the third. My specialty was selling guilt, page 34 and 35. So you can see, Bob Lewis is just really pointing out that you don't have clinical expertise in this group. Maybe good-hearted, maybe, it's seen some things that maybe some of us haven't seen, but clearly they had an agenda. Clearly they decided that they made a conscious choice to ignore certain data and certain observation and push forward with the agenda, the story, the narrative that they wanted to push for. They wanted to, force people to, criminalize or, put their spouse in jail and things like that. And I didn't know that that's what was going on with all this. So there you guys have it. You can pick up the book, Coordinating Community Responses to Domestic Violence, Lessons from Duluth and Beyond. Melanie Shepard, Ellen Pence, and it's published by Sage Publishers. So one thing I would just ask that you to share this with friends that you have. Also, if you would consider supporting this channel financially, that would be great. I know that a lot of the people just stop by. Most of my views don't come from subscribers. But for those of you that are subscribers or Christians, I know that you have a complex giving scheme. And one thing I'd like to just offer up is that, it's really difficult for a lot of pastors to be able to talk about these types of issues, because, well, I think in one sense there's certain things you just can't say publicly. And for me, this is just a YouTube channel at this point. I'm not making a lot of money off of it. So I'm pretty free to be able to say certain things. But if you have big churches, I think in our society today, it's going to be more and more difficult that people really stick to the scriptures and what Jesus said on divorce, remarriage, forgiveness, looking at some of these issues as far as, who will God accept into the kingdom of heaven, and, ever speaking about any group of people or group of sins. It's going to be tough being able to talk about these things. You can tell that this other guy that I talked about, Bob Lewis, he did write a book. You can check him out. It's called The Feminist Lie. And so if you really feel like feminism is a huge, huge, huge problem and getting rid of it is the solution, you can go down that route. He might be able to give you some insights. For me, I really feel like the answer is, a spiritual renewal, a reform, maybe in the core type. I'm going to try to look at some things as far as divorce reform in the future. But really, I think the heart of the heart is, abiding in Christ, taking advantage of the fruits of the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit, of growing in love, faith, hope, and love, and really being merciful, realizing that we've been forgiven so much as Christians. And so how can we go? Like that one story, right? A man that was forgiven like a lifetime worth of debt, right? You guys know that parable. The man that he had a debt, it was like more than he could ever work off in his whole lifetime. He went to the individual that he owed the money to, and he was forgiven his debt. But then he turned right around and went to someone else and said, you know what, you owe me this small amount of money, 10, 20, $100, and I'm throwing you in debtor's prison for it until you pay me. We can't do this, This is just crazy. This is not what Christianity is about. So that's all I have to say. Hope you guys like the video. Give me other ideas. I'm going to try to tackle this issue about infidelity in marriage, and that's a tough one. If you have, you know, articles or things that you think is really helpful and insightful, send them my way, drop them in the comments. I will check them out and try to assimilate those into a video as far as how to help people go through that. Okay, thanks so much. Bye.